There's quite a few intriguing video game releases on the horizon, but no game to me is as exciting as From Software's Elden Ring. To be frank, From Software is my favorite developer in the entire industry and has been for years. Playing the original Dark Souls a decade ago now was a watershed gaming moment for me. Not only was it an incredible, even profound experience to play that game for the first time, but Dark Souls fundamentally changed the way I think about games. It helped clarify what I did and did not value in game design, and ultimately what it is I want to experience emotionally and intellectually from a game. Since then, I've played and replayed over and over each of the 6 main From Software games released over the last decade plus, from 2009's Demon's Souls to 2019's Sekiro. You see, these aren't just games that I simply play for some hours and then move on from. From Software's Soulsborne games are my desert island games. Their signature third-person action RPG formula just does it for me, and fellow fans know exactly what I'm talking about. In my book, these games and their minute-to-minute gameplay defy all comparison. So that's why I can't wait for Elden Ring, despite the fact that the god himself, From Software president Hidetaka Miyazaki, has confirmed that this new game will be markedly different from the Soulsborne titles that came before it. I have my preferences among From Software's 6 modern era games, sure, but I do appreciate both the familiarity and uniqueness in each of the company's games from the last 12 years. And the ways in which they pushed the limits of movement and combat and AI in Sekiro, their most recent release, has me feeling very optimistic about the future. So I want to discuss what we already know about Elden Ring, what details Miyazaki and his team have officially confirmed to date, as well as my general hopes and expectations for the game, which my gut tells me will release in 2022, perhaps in spring or fall 2022, but we'll just have to see. So that's enough of a preamble though, let's dive into Elden Ring. Elden Ring was first announced at E3 2019, and surprisingly, Hidetaka Miyazaki himself actually agreed to a Q&A interview about the game with Bandai Namco's Sam Wilkinson, which was published in June 2019 on Xbox.com. That interview, aside from the game's teaser trailer and a few official tweets and images, gives us our only legitimate glimpse into this new game world. So Miyazaki said that development of Elden Ring actually began immediately following the completion of Dark Souls 3's Ringed City DLC, which released in March 2017. Now that's interesting because that means Elden Ring was in an early stage of development while From Software was neck deep in the development of Sekiro, which released in March 2019, but whose development we know started all the way back in 2015 following the completion of Bloodborne's Old Hunters DLC. You following this timeline? So just that alone is a testament to the creative talent at this studio and the efficiency of the artists and designers and programmers. From Software has stayed so busy over the last decade, it's really crazy. And in the interview, Miyazaki gives credit to his co-directors, whom he appoints to help him make these games into realities. I've sensed that some Soulsborne fans don't want Miyazaki to have collaborators, they want him and him alone to have executive control over every aspect of a game with no negotiation. And I don't subscribe to that train of thought. Miyazaki is still the creative executive at the studio, his final word is the final word, but he obviously wants to collaborate. He wants to bounce ideas off his teammates and to have them do the same with him. He wants to groom up and coming game designers. I have no problem with that. He had co-directors on Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro, and I believe those are 2 of the greatest video games ever created. Now, Miyazaki went on to say that with this new idea with Elden Ring, when development first began in 2017, he again wanted to develop a dark fantasy action RPG, but specifically wanted to incorporate various elements and gameplay mechanics that just weren't possible within the Dark Souls framework. So that's interesting. Consider all the dark fantasy games that Miyazaki has already created, and he still has new ideas. He still, 3 to 4 years ago, could envision yet another game that was unique from anything the studio had already created. In terms of gameplay, Miyazaki told Wilkinson that Elden Ring will remain a third-person action RPG, but unlike Sekiro, which is so action-intensive with its unique sword-fighting mechanics, Elden Ring, well, it will feature, quote, responsive melee-based combat, end quote, will have a much greater focus on RPG elements. And I was honestly happy to hear this. Look, I absolutely love Sekiro. I actually believe Sekiro has the most gratifying combat system of any video game I have ever played. And while this wasn't a complaint for me during my playthroughs of the game, I can see how some players might not like that there is, in most cases, one correct way to defeat an enemy or boss, and the game will challenge you and frustrate you as a means of steering you into that, let's call it, fun zone. In Sekiro, you can sprint around combat arenas, quickly slash an enemy and try to escape, and rinse, wash, and repeat until you deplete their HP. But this is not the most fun or efficient way to play, and the game does try to punish you for playing this way, whereas if you focus on parries and posture, you'll have to overcome a learning curve, but on the other end of that curve is an unreal gameplay experience. So I love that dynamic, but I can see how some people while playing Sekiro missed the character creativity from Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and to a lesser extent Bloodborne, where you have lots of different build options and combat styles to suit your personal preferences. And most bosses in the Dark Souls trilogy can be pretty effectively handled in a variety of ways, so it sounds like that creative freedom that many players do desire will indeed be satisfied in Elden Ring. Another note on this topic, but related to Bloodborne specifically, coming off of Dark Souls 1 and 2, the speed of the combat in Bloodborne, the incentive to be aggressive, to attack in order to heal, that was such a breath of fresh air, as were the sparser RPG elements. There's lots of different weapons and ways to approach combat in Bloodborne. It's not a simplistic game in and of itself by any means, but when compared to Dark Souls, its character build flexibility is relatively simpler. It's just a different experience. In Bloodborne, you're constantly pushing forward, engaging enemies. That straightforwardness is one of its strengths. That's why Bloodborne is so fun. Whereas, depending on your character build in a Dark Souls game, you might have a different, more slowly paced experience in which you're being pretty creative in how you meander through the game areas and handle bosses. I personally love these differences in the From Software games. I love that I play Dark Souls 3 for a different reason than I play Sekiro, for example. I think it'd be a shame if the studio's 6 main games all played identically. A June 18, 2019 tweet from the official Elden Ring Twitter account states, quote, heavily based on Dark Souls but with a more open and vast environment, Elden Ring will also have fundamentally different combat to create new situations in battle and exploration, end quote. So I like the sound of that. In ways, this is going to feel familiar, third-person, dark fantasy RPG. Immediately you picture Dark Souls. But it could be a lot like Sekiro, where the combat in that game is just familiar enough to From Software fans that it can be quickly picked up and played. However, to master the new mechanics, that takes many more hours of careful play. So that prospect is super exciting to me. This is going to be a Souls-like experience, but we're going to have a new combat system to master. Perhaps repeatedly mashing R1 won't cut it anymore. I think that alone could keep Elden Ring from feeling like Dark Souls 4, let's say. I'd be happy with Dark Souls 4 at some point, but I'm excited that Elden Ring is a new IP, so like Bloodborne was different and like Sekiro was different, I do want Elden Ring to feel and play differently. Continuing on this gameplay thread, Miyazaki also told Wilkinson that Elden Ring will be satisfyingly challenging in that signature way that players have come to expect from any From Software game. He said, quote, the importance we place on the joy the player experiences through overcoming challenges will be the same as it is in other titles. I believe it will prove to be a very satisfying experience, end quote. Additionally, Miyazaki said, quote, boss fights are something we enjoy making and make up one of the climaxes to this title as well. We feel there is a wide variety of unique and horrifying bosses for players to look forward to, end quote. He also reiterated that a wide variety of weapons and magic and ways to engage enemies will be available to players, again, far more so than in Dark Souls. He specifically mentioned tweaking tactics to suit different situations. Could that mean weapon arts? Could that mean weapon transformations? Could that mean stances? Could that mean something we can't even conceive of? And the bit about engaging enemies in different ways made me think of the new verticality that was present in Sekiro. Suddenly, we were able to run super fast and jump super high and swing and scale obstacles and attack from above. I hope to some degree that speed and verticality carry over to Elden Ring. Miyazaki also said in this part of the interview that character customization will be back. It's been a staple in all of From Software's modern games other than Sekiro, and I did miss it there. I love the game Sekiro, but I didn't care that much about the Sekiro character. I didn't find him that compelling. In my mind, he honestly paled in comparison to some of my original characters. And Miyazaki said to Wilkinson that it only made sense to reincorporate character customization if Elden Ring was going to be so heavily focused on RPG elements. And I would agree. When asked what single element separates Elden Ring from Dark Souls the most, Miyazaki said it's the open world nature of the game, and let me just quote him directly here. Quote, "There are many definitions to the term open world, and I might not be phrasing it correctly, but we have simply tried our own approach to a game with a large, open field to play in. It is a world full of danger and threats, as well as many areas ripe for exploration. Among those areas, you will also find intricately designed, multi-layered castles and such. Due to this, the scale of the world and its narrative, as well as the depth and freedom of exploration, have increased dramatically. It is without a doubt our biggest title yet in terms of sheer volume." End quote. So there's a lot to unpack there, particularly Miyazaki acknowledging the varying definitions of open world. You could argue that a game like Dark Souls 1 is open world, a large, intricately interconnected world. You can run off in any direction at any given time and may only be limited by your current character level or a specially locked gate, etc. But Dark Souls 1 is a very carefully curated game too. It's all about AI and level design, so for those reasons, I personally don't think of it as being a traditional open world game. When I think open world, I think Grand Theft Auto, Elder Scrolls, I think of sandboxes. And if you watch this channel, you know that while I have fun in some open world games, I'm largely partial to more linear experiences. I appreciate good level design, and that's why I get bored with sandboxes. You see, sandbox games often try to keep players engaged with story and characters, and I usually care less about story and characters in those kinds of games. I'm usually more interested in exploring, collecting items, engaging enemies. I run around and do those things until I get bored. And at that point, I either slog through the story missions or just quit. I might contrast this experience with the experience of playing a Naughty Dog game from the last decade, in which story and characters and gameplay and level design are all so intertwined in this holistic kind of way that I'm almost always engaged, on the edge of my seat, having a great time. And I think although From Software's games are on the surface very different from Naughty Dog's, there's actually some similarities there. Think about it. You might be wearing one boss's armor, wielding another boss's weapon, slicing your way through an intricately designed level that ends at another boss's fog gate. The level design, gameplay, and lore come together so nicely in Soulsborne games. This dynamic is really unique, and I hope it's not lost in Elden Ring. Compared to Anor Londo, Central Yharnam, the Undead Settlement, Hirata Estate, a large open field sounds pretty dull. Now, finding intricately designed, multi-layered castles sounds cool, but what does that mean? Does that mean you're riding a horse for 2 minutes through a field full of dredgelings to reach a standalone dungeon? Because that sounds like a Zelda game from 20 years ago. And don't get me wrong, I adore Zelda games, but I want Elden Ring to feel new. I want to experience something I've never experienced before. In Soulsborne games, the worlds are designed in such a way that it often feels like you're dungeon crawling, whether or not you're in a designated cavern or castle. But then of course you do work your way through many memorable multi-level locations like the Prison of Hope, Sen's Fortress, Canehurst Castle, Lothric Castle. Miyazaki is leading me to believe that in Elden Ring, we may get some of the biggest and best dungeon areas that From Software has ever designed. But that simply makes me wonder even more, what purpose will the open field serve? How will it be engaging? Why will we want to spend time there and not just blow through it on our way to the next sick dungeon, because won't the dungeons be home to the best loot, the best puzzles, the best bosses? Maybe or maybe not. For me, this may be the most puzzling aspect of the Elden Ring concept, but if anyone can solve the big, boring sandbox problem, it's gotta be Miyazaki, right? One more note. Soulsborne games are incredibly speedrun friendly, and I don't mean they're easy to speedrun. I just mean the way in which the games are designed, the way in which their New Game Plus systems work. They're highly replayable. For example, one of my favorite gaming experiences is to semi-speedrun the Demon's Souls remake on New Game Plus. Basically just going from beginning to end as efficiently as possible. I know the level designs, I know the boss AIs, the game plays so well, looks so good, is so much fun, is so satisfying, that it's like, well, I could play something new, or I could just run Demon's Souls on New Game Plus again, because why not? And I'm sure Soulsborne fans know exactly what I'm talking about here. Even if you've done it 10 or 20 or 100 times before, running out of Yusefka's clinic for the first time in Bloodborne is always exciting and intriguing. The complexity of the AI, the varied RNG, means that no two playthroughs are ever identical. And I hope the special dynamic that I've only experienced in Soulsborne games isn't lost in Elden Ring. I hope the game isn't so big and bloated and silly that after 1 or 2 playthroughs, I feel like I'm set, that I'm good, that I don't need or want any more Elden Ring for a good while. I hope the second I finish the game, all I want to do is start all over again. I've always thought that of a great novel too. As soon as I read the final sentence in the final chapter, all I want to do is flip back to the very first page, the first sentence, the first paragraph, the first couple of pages. Endings can enhance our appreciation of beginnings. It's true across many art forms and mediums, and I certainly believe it's true with Soulsborne games. I also have to address art direction, one of my favorite aspects of any game. Plain and simple, I want Elden Ring to have a sick aesthetic. I don't want generic horses and goblins and knights. I want Elden Ring to feel highly curated. From the armor and outfits and weapons to the locations and architecture and music. Bloodborne for many players is so memorable because of its distinct art direction. In fact, the unique vibe of each Soulsborne game is not a trivial thing. Aesthetics really make these games what they are, so I hope we're treated yet again in Elden Ring. One of the last remaining topics from Miyazaki's interview that deserves some discussion is Elden Ring's lore. Here's what Miyazaki said in the interview. Quote, "Elden Ring is the name given to a mysterious concept that defines the world itself. As the trailer at the conference implied, this Elden Ring has been shattered. The significance of this will be one of the important themes of the game." End quote. He also said of the character revealed in official concept art, quote, "We chose this character because of his eccentric aspects, as well as the way he portrays the darkness that the world and story possess. While Elden Ring may be a classic dark fantasy title, it is more than just that. This character also represents one more theme in addition to the previously mentioned eccentricity. That theme is the will or ambition of mankind." End quote. And of course, the themes and characters that will be explored in Elden Ring were largely devised by author George R.R. Martin. Martin's contributions to Elden Ring have been heavily marketed, a selling point for the game. And in this interview, Miyazaki clearly states that Martin's role with Elden Ring is that he wrote the overarching mythos for the game world itself. And that mythos was inspired by brainstorming sessions and exploratory conversations that Martin and Miyazaki had over a period of time. In the interview, Miyazaki said that he's a longtime fan of Martin, which is well known among Miyazaki's colleagues, one of whom reached out to Martin regarding a possible collaboration, and to the surprise of everyone at From Software, Martin responded positively and openly. Miyazaki expresses a lot of gratitude to Martin in the interview and says that the world of Elden Ring is full of fresh stimulus thanks to his contributions. So, what to make of that? Well, if you're a Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones fan, or a fan of Martin's other work like the vampire novel Fever Dream, you're super excited. This is a dream come true. I have to say, I'm not a huge Martin fan. About a decade ago or more, I read the 5 Song of Ice and Fire novels published to date, and while I enjoyed them at first, ultimately I was turned off by what I perceived to be uninspired aesthetics, a meandering plot, and the author's propensity for killing well-established characters time and time again. After finishing A Dance with Dragons, it was clear to me that my interest in the series had waned and I just kinda moved on to other things. Ultimately, I much prefer J.R.R. Tolkien. I prefer Tolkien's writing, his sensibilities, his originality, and his Middle-earth universe. But I don't hold it against anyone if they really like Martin and his work, that's totally fine. And I still do feel that Martin had some good ideas baked into A Song of Ice and Fire. Frankly, a lot of his lore and world building remains interesting to me. I actually may have been more interested had he devoted more time to some of those concepts and characters and locations versus what actually ended up on the pages. I don't believe Martin lacks creativity or imagination or anything like that. I'm not convinced his involvement in Elden Ring will be a bad thing at all. It sounds like Miyazaki felt that he and his team did need an injection of new ideas, so this collaboration might be great. It might be one of the reasons why Elden Ring feels unique compared to Dark Souls. I just hope that the lore of Elden Ring, the world of Elden Ring, still has Miyazaki's fingerprint on it. Because I think Miyazaki is an incredible creative visionary. And yes, his games are typically sparse on plot, which I very much like, but that doesn't mean they're not thematically rich and that the lore and characters aren't compelling, because they really are. Dark Souls 3 comes to mind right away. The lore is so good, and the implications at the end of the game with Gale and the painting woman and the showdown over the Dark Soul at the end of the world, the everlasting pigment for a new painting, a dark, cold, gentle place, it's incredible stuff. So there's a lot to think about here. In the end, I'd say I'm optimistic. Maybe because Martin is a writer, not a video game developer influenced by Tolkien, but a lifelong writer. Maybe the lore and characters and weapon descriptions and all the stuff that Soulsborne fans have come to love, maybe it'll be next level in Elden Ring. That's the hope anyway. Okay, and the final talking point, let's quickly address the alleged Elden Ring gameplay leak. And I do mean quickly, because leaks generally don't interest me very much, and there's already a lot of people online who spend lots of time and energy combing over this stuff. But over the last month, a rough around the edges trailer emerged online, a video clip, footage captured off screen of what appears to be an Elden Ring trailer. I recommend checking out this VGC article from March 1st if you want more details, hyperlinks, and comments from a few gaming journalists who claim to know things. I suppose there's always a chance that this trailer is just bogus. It's not real. This isn't a product from Software, and the footage we're seeing is not of Elden Ring. On the other hand, this footage might just be of Elden Ring, and if that's the case, I can only hope this is early development footage. Maybe this was just a mock-up for investors or for internal use, because in my opinion, it looks horrible. The character models look antiquated, the horse combat looks clunky, the voice acting is uninspired, the textures and lighting are very underwhelming, not next gen whatsoever. Because we know Elden Ring's development started back in 2017, I'm hoping we're just seeing some early asset builds dropped into the Dark Souls 3 engine essentially. Like, hopefully this was never meant to be seen, that it's not indicative of the final product, because I don't like the look of it, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. In closing, what do I want from Elden Ring? Well, I want another great From Software game. I want something new. I'm not looking for Dark Souls 4, and I'm also not looking for an empty sandbox. I only hope that the best conventions of Soulsborne games are retained and even reimagined in a new inspired package with rich lore and intriguing world, and most importantly of all, excellent combat, excellent minute-to-minute gameplay. And that hinges entirely upon movement, weapons, AI, and of course unforgettable boss battles. Basically, all the good stuff we've come to expect from a Miyazaki game. Martin's involvement has me on the fence, the alleged leak has me concerned, but in the end, I have to go back to From Software's resume. From Demon Souls to Sekiro, the 6 games I've loved and played and replayed over and over during the last decade, these are my favorite games ever made. They entirely changed the way I think about video games, what I like about video games, what I don't like. And I have to have faith in Miyazaki, the visionary, that he will wow me and all From Software fans yet again with a new next-gen gaming experience, one that we'll cherish for years to come, long after its release. So I'm optimistic, that's the bottom line. But how do you feel? What do you think? What do you want from Elden Ring? Tell me in the comments below, and thanks for watching.